So I've actually gotten into Yu-Gi-Oh recently, and honestly, it's actually really fun, but not in like a moral good way, more like a messed up, morally wrong kind of way. So you know how in Magic there's like standard, modern, legacy, vintage, and you know, as you go to older and older formats, the game gets more and more complex with like a higher and higher levels of power. Vintage is like the basic ground level of Yu-Gi-Oh! The game has no resource system. There is no mana. The only real limitation you have as a player is that you can only normal summon once per turn, which is to say you can only essentially cast a level 4 or lower creature once per turn. Beyond that, do whatever you want, go wild. And this includes instant speed interaction. So a lot of games only go to like 2 or 3 turns because everything just happens immediately. Counter spells or negates, in this case, for your opponent's cards just get spent on the very first turn, which is a very strange feeling to play in a match and have to spend all your cards to stop your opponent immediately. But at the same time, it makes games actually go by pretty fast in like a fun way. If you play against blue-white control on Arena, you kind of have to sit there and be like, okay, maybe I can draw the out. Versus on Yu-Gi-Oh, if your opponent can play through your interaction and actually establish a powerful end board, you're just like, okay, cool, concede. Like, the game is on average much more powerful compared to Magic, I think, but at the same time, it's more powerful in a casual way, if that makes sense. I've been playing exclusively through Master Duel, which has been my one and only way to actually play the game, and if you follow Master Duel at all, or I guess maybe even Yu-Gi-Oh at all, you'll know that our meta right now is kind of not great. Honestly, even with the bad meta, Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel still feels leagues better than Arena. Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck building isn't really the exact same as building in Magic. Yu-Gi-Oh! Essentially releases these meant to work together sets of cards where every card tutors for another card to help you extend towards some kind of end board, where once you've actually cast all your cards in your deck because they all grab each other, you have like 3 counter spells, 2 destructions, and a powerful creature that's hard to kill. And then during your first turn, your opponent is supposed to spend what is essentially just every different version of a free counterspell to prevent you from reaching the strongest state of your end board. It is essentially what the average match dynamic is for Yu-Gi-Oh! And as I played Master Duel more and more, I began to wonder, could I actually emulate some of these decks in Commander? And I decided to test that by trying to emulate the very first deck I played, Tenpai Dragon. Tenpai Dragon is a deck that wins games by using multiple board wipes to completely destroy your opponent's fields before using a selection of dragon cards known as Tenpai Dragons that all have ways to attack and sack themselves in order to make larger dragons, which also have the ability to immediately reanimate the dragons that were sacked to create these larger dragons. For example, Pydra is able to search for Chundra, which if it attacks, can search for Phaedra and put it onto the field. Unlike other decks in Yu-Gi-Oh!, these dragons have the special ability to summon creatures from the extra deck during the battle phase. After each dragon attacks once, Chundra and Pydra can sack themselves to create the Bident Dragon, which can reanimate Chundra, and then Phaedra can reanimate Pydra. All of these dragons are treated as new entities, so they can all attack again, after which Phaedra can sack itself with the Bident Dragon to create the Transcendent Dragon. So I did a lot of digging online, trying to figure out how on earth I would possibly recreate these insane, like, summoning lines in Yu-Gi-Oh! In Commander of all places. And I actually managed to find a commander that I think could actually patch up one of the glaring weaknesses that I think this deck might have. And that is Piru the Volatile.
Ho, brother, ho, 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 ho! What the heck?
I know. Oh my god, are you kidding me? You want to play this goofy, like, Mardu callback dragon to the original 8-mana Elder Dragons? Are you serious? Yes, just hear me out here, alright? Since this deck essentially is trying to be a Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck in Commander, we're gonna try and have a very explosive play very early. And I think Piru gives us access to a better late game by virtue of simply existing in our command zone. Piru gives us access to a board wipe and an insane amount of life gain should the game go long, and her extremely high mana value allows us to take advantage of cards like Seeing Study and Imposing Grandeur, which are essentially just 5 mana, draw 8 spells, which are both really, really strong. You could probably justify Tymna and Rograk instead for more speed with, you know, the Rograk package of Mox Amber and friends, but that would make the price of a list a lot higher, and I would like this list to not be $400 for you to have to play it. And also, given that we're trying to summon just a bunch of Spirit Dragons, I believe Piru just has better flavor, and like I said, gives us a slightly stronger late game. So what is the goal of this deck? The goal of this deck, in order to emulate Tenpai Dragon as accurately as possible, is to summon a large amount of dragons in a single turn that all have beneficial death triggers before sacrificing them, and before their death triggers resolve, immediately reanimate them back to the field, allowing all of our own dragons to gain the full benefits of their own death triggers. And since we're in Mardu, the most obvious dragons that we'll be using for this are Ryusei, Atsushi, Kokusho, Junji, Yosei, and Ao. You know, the Kamigawa Spirit Dragons, because they quite literally match the exact same aesthetic as the Tenpai Dragons. Wow, that's really strange. Now, I know what you're thinking. Fast Man, what is this combo you have in mind? Allow me to explain. To begin, we need to assemble our combo beginner with Iname, Death Aspect, which when it enters will allow us to send every single spirit from our deck to the graveyard. So this includes our Tenpai Dragons as well as support spirits like Kagimaru First to Suffer, Return to Past Caller, Karmic Guide, and of course, who could forget, Shimatsu the Blood Cloaked. The most insane metal name for the most, like, garbage card ever. 4 mana 0/0. As it enters, you have to sacrifice creatures to give it +1/+1 counters. If you want this thing to be a 4 mana 4/4, you gotta sacrifice 4 things. Yeah, that's worth it, right? But here, it serves an actually good purpose, I promise. Anyways, we need to either cast Iname by drawing him, or, in line with the spirit of a deck, send him to our graveyard before reanimating him, which we can do with Entomb, Buried Alive, Lively Dirge, and Final Parting, which also serves as a tutor to our hand for our single target reanimation, like Reanimate, Animate Dead, Footsteps of the Goryo, and, as previously mentioned, Karmic Guide. If we draw a Name, hard casting is of course an option, but if we'd like, we can discard it to the grave as well with Faithless Looting, Demand Answers, and Thrill Possibility. Once we get Iname to the field, we can send every single spirit in our deck to the graveyard. And once we've done this, we use a mass reanimate effect to revive all of our spirits, of which we have several, such as Storm of Souls, Living Death, Patriarch's Bidding, Naming Spirits, and Bringer of the Last Gift. Once we've done this, a few things will happen. Shimatsu will die due to state-based actions. We do not want to sacrifice creatures to make him enter with counters. Not yet anyways. Return to Past Caller will allow us to return our non-creature mass reanimate spell to our hand, giving us a way to bounce back if our opponents manage to break our board. And Karmic Guide would allow us to return a creature from our graveyard to the battlefield. If we previously resolved Cauldron of Souls or Promise of Tomorrow, or we have leftover mana for Cauldron Haze or Second Sunrise, we can use Karmic Guide trigger to reanimate Shimatsu to sacrifice our entire board. Or, alternatively, we can just sacrifice Kagimaru First to Suffer for a single black with 5 or more cards in hand to kill all of our creatures. Return them back to the field to reap the full benefits of our death triggers from our Tenpai Dragons. Honestly, even just with the Mass Reanimate spell, our combo is essentially in a pretty acceptable state of an end board. We've gotten 6 dragons plus just extra support spirits. That's fine. You really don't need to have the looping death trigger effect to make this a good play, but it does make it a lot better. But there actually is even more we can do here if we have the right cards. To make our end board even stronger, if we resolve the Rising of the Day or Dragon Tempest beforehand, our board will have haste. And Tempest will potentially allow us to deal 6 damage to 6 targets of our choice, since we'll have 6 dragons on the field, giving us the strongest potential version of our end board, with Haste allowing us to deal anywhere from 63 to 101 damage in a single turn, depending on what other pieces we have in the field. So that's all the cards we need for our main combo line, but I did mention that Tenpai Dragon plays a lot of board wipes to try and break your opponent's boards before trying to go for a combo. And of course, I had to make sure we met that quota. Ryusei and Kagemaru already kind of function as Wraths, just as part of our main combo, but we have 7 more, with Blasphemous Act and Vanquish the Horde being just 2 really cheap board wipes if we draw them. Sublime Exhalation is just a Wrath of God really in this deck. Starfall Invocation can reanimate a creature we destroy this way, so we can, for example, blow up a Kokusho and then immediately get him back so we can kill him again to drain our opponents for 5 once more. Dusk destroys all creatures power 3 or greater, and Dawn returns all creatures power 2 or less from our grave to our hand, which in this deck isn't really a lot. It's only Shimatsu and Karmic Guide, but honestly that's all we need, because Karmic Guide would reanimate Return Past Caller, which would be able to return one of our mass reanimate spells from our grave to hand, or really just anything else we need. Crooks of Fate can destroy all non-dragons, allowing us to just swing in for a decent amount of damage for roughly 30 in the air if we want to. And Final Showdown not only can destroy all creatures at instant speed, it can also make all creatures lose all abilities if we want to, or allow us to keep one of our creatures by paying 1 extra mana. We have some floodgates in the form of Deafening Silence, Rule of Law, and Eidolon of Rhetoric. This essentially just slows our opponents down and lets us go for our combo at a more slower, consistent rate. You do need a decent amount of mana before you can actually go for your full Tenpai combo. And even though not being able to cast more than 1 spell a turn does hurt us as well, casting a Name and then next turn casting a Living Death is still a very fine play, considering that doing this would get back a Return Past Caller, which would return Living Death to my hand immediately, allowing us to just cast Living Death again if our opponents do manage to break our board by casting a board wipe. We have 2 relatively budget-friendly tutors with Profane Tutor and Beseech the Queen. Me personally, I think Profane Tutor is actually just better than Demonic Tutor. I think this card is super slept on. It is like Demonic Tutor, but way better in my opinion, because it actually gives you time to adapt and forces your opponents to not play too hard, because if they do, you just go and tutor a board wipe and blow up their field. Maybe I'm cringe for that, I don't know. And Beseech the Queen is a 3 mana tutor at the cost of triple black, but you can only grab a card if its mana value is less than or equal to the number of lands you control. For card draw, as already mentioned, we have Singing Study and Imposing Grandeur as just 2 really good 5 mana draw 8 spells, which is just insanely above rate for the game. Demand Answers, Faithless Looting, and Throw Possibility serve as card selection and card filtering. And we also have a selection of just some pretty decent card draw spells with Painful Truths, Read the Bones, Siphon Mind, and Wheel of Misfortune. And then finally for ramp, we have a pretty average package here. Arcane Signet, Fell Warstone, you already know. All 3 talismans and all 3 signets in our colors. A Soul Ring, 2 rituals with Dark Ritual and Cabal Ritual, allowing us to get to our combo a little faster if we draw them. And a personal favorite of mine, Visions of Ruin, which can be 4 mana to have each opponent sack an artifact, and then you make a treasure for each artifact sacked this way. And it has flashback for 8 and 2 red, but costs X less to cast this way, where X is the greatest mana value of a commander you own in the command zone. So Visions of Ruin goes from 4 to actually 2 mana from the graveyard to essentially de-ramp your opponents if they all have mana rocks, and then makes you 3 treasures. This card is 50 cents. I don't know why more people aren't playing this. Even if this card didn't have the flashback at all, I would play this. It's 4 mana to essentially unramp your opponents, assuming they have only mana rocks, and then rituals you for 3 treasures. That's just a really good effect for 4 mana. So with that all out of the way, I know I just did a pretty big info dump on you. let me go over the full combo line once again, as simple as possible to make sure you understand what our main goal is. Step 1. Get Iname, Death Aspect, into the graveyard. Step 2. Reanimate Iname to entomb all your Tenpai Dragons and Spore Spirits. Step 3. Cast a Mass Reanimate spell. Step 4. Give your Dragons Persist or have a second Sunrise effect in hand. Step 4. Reanimate Shimatsu with Karmic Guide or sacrifice Kagemaru to kill all Tenpai Dragons. They will then return to the field, letting them gain the benefits of their own death triggers. Step 5. If board is destroyed, repeat from Step 3, as Return Past Caller will allow you to loop Living Death over and over and over again, giving you an infinite endgame as long as your Living Death or Patriarch's Bidding never gets countered. With all the cards in this deck, our final budget price comes around to roughly only $150, which all things considered, I think is actually pretty good, considering the fact that this deck is going for a insanely convoluted line of play that really just has no business being an actual line of play you can make in Magic. Now, if you've had any experience at all in the competitive Commander space, there's a really good chance you've just heard me ramble here for 10-15 minutes about a really weird dragon reanimate, self-sacrifice, reanimate before the triggers resolve deck, and are thinking right now, hey, wait a minute, Bounce Man, isn't this just like a really cringe CDH deck? Yes.